So you literally
There's
learn
her
to
just
dance
Beyonce
on
in the corner.
I love that so much.
Oh yeah, because we're all we're all very so
It's basically all participation. What? I don't think.
I might have to
I think that's.
Let me show you this.
I think that's what he said.
All right, today we have our guest speaker as promised. So this is both my father and your lecturer today. So this is Dr. Dan Keyler. Work at the University of Minnesota as well, I guess in the School of Pharmacy, right? And then has
In the graduate school.
Yeah, in the graduate school. And then on the side, kind of developed this hobby throughout his life. Well, toxicology is a profession, but kind of dealing with envenomations as a consultant, right? So, as a child, it was not uncommon to hear his pager go off in the middle of the night, and it was someplace across the world, and it was a doctor wondering what to do with this patient that's been bit by a venomous, I guess, snake or other venomous animal even, like scorpions, spiders. So today he's going to be talking about neurotoxins, and I will let him take it from here.
Yeah, I started as a general toxicologist and then with the Department of Internal Medicine at Hennepin County in clinical pharmacology, and so I'd see patients with drug overdoses, chemical poisonings, and every now and then we get a snake bite. And I grew up in the country, and there were snakes, and my parents didn't say you're supposed to be afraid of them. They wouldn't say they went out and hugged them, but I thought they were fascinating, so I kind of studied them. Then I moved to the city, starting high school, and ended up living not too far from a physician by the name of Sherman Minton, who was world renowned for his work with venomous snakes. He was also the chair of the Department of Immunology at the Indiana University Medical School. So he began to teach me more about the chemistry, the medical consequences of bites, and the science of the snakes, in addition to just the fact that they were interesting creatures. So I kind of kept that in the background, went on through school and specialized in toxicology, and then over time focused more on the natural toxins and the sources of those natural toxins, which is called toxinology, and ended up pretty much with the bulk of my career then, towards the last number of years, involved with venomous snakes, spiders, and scorpions, and toads, anything, it's kind of weird. But today I'm going to talk about neurotoxins that are derived from snake venoms. I'll talk a little bit about the snakes that generate these toxins in their venom, what the toxins are, and then the consequences medically if someone's bitten, and what these toxins can do physiologically.
Dad, I don't want to restrict your movements too much, but I'm recording with this one off the computer audio, so I don't know if you want to, because there's a bunch of people that are sick and gone.
So where do you want me to be?
I mean,
Sit
from
down?
the computer. You can sit if you'd like. I usually sit.
Okay, I'll sit.
He's learning the pain of having free.
Feel free to ask questions anytime. I don't mind being interrupted. So, if we look at crude venom, and this is a black mamba. Does anybody know why that's a black mamba?
Take a guess.
What?
It's mouth.
Exactly. The mouth is black, not just because the snake's black. It's one of the only venomous species that has a black mouth. So it's a black mamba. And here's some venom. Dendroaspis polylepis is the scientific name. And venom in general is clear to cloudy. Sometimes it's yellow, but it's odorless. This is kind of what it looks like when it's clear. It can be slightly viscous. Has a specific gravity of 1.1, so it's a little more dense than water. Dry weight, if you take this and freeze dry it or lyophilize it, about 25 to 30% of that fluid volume will end up flakes and crystals. And it's slightly acidic, pH of 5.9, in contrast to 7.4 physiologic pH. A lot of things in snake venom. The term venom singular, but all the things that are in there, numerous enzymatic proteins, non-enzymatic proteins, polypeptides, short oligocompounds, and then non-protein components. But all these things that tend to cause the toxic effects that are generated when a snake bites. And so any snake venom might contain 26, 30 different components. And each of those components has its own pharmacological or toxic effect. These are Venn diagrams. And my point in showing this is each of these pie charts, the different colors represent a different protein family that's in the venom. And so if you look at vipers versus pit vipers, this is like rattlesnakes in the US, and this is like copperheads and water moccasins. But you look at the different colors, you see that they're represented in different quantities. And so what really makes a difference in toxicity is the ratio of these. They all contain the same protein families, but some may not be represented at all, some may be highly represented. And what we're going to talk about today is the lapid species. Those are the snakes that generate primarily neurotoxins. And if you look at this, 50% of the neurotoxic effect is due to three-fingered toxins, which I'll talk about. And nearly the other half is almost always phospholipase A2. So these are two key toxins that elicit neurotoxicity. Again, if you look at the Venn diagram, this is a liquid chromatogram, high-pressure liquid chromatogram separating venom components. Each one of these peaks is a different component within the venom. So that list I showed you, this is some of those that are represented. Of significance here, this is a midget-fated rattlesnake in the United States, an uncommon one. Has a fair number of myotoxins and neurotoxins. And so those are the key things that elicit neurotoxic effect. And I'll talk a little more about how that plays into designing treatment for snakebite. The venom, when it gets into the body, what really happens? Well, you got a bite that occurs. And initially that can be a subcutaneous bite, it can be an intramuscular bite, and in rare cases it's intravenous. But regardless, it ends up getting absorbed into the central circulation, the blood. It can be biotransformed and eliminated. It can just be eliminated directly without any transformation. But what causes the toxicity is when it binds to receptors or tissue binding sites. And when you get to those, then you elicit a toxic response, and that's the pharmacodynamic effect. Everything else is pharmacokinetics, like where it goes in the body and how it gets there. So neurotoxin actions, where does it happen? Neuromuscular junction. You got presynaptic receptor, postsynaptic. Acetylcholine's the key neurotransmitter.
So this is just a neuron synapsing onto a muscle.
It's the neuromuscular junction.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm telling them, we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh.
We've talked about the things that neurons can synapse.
Oh, okay.
Like other neurons, glands,
Okay.
or muscle.
So some of these toxins, the way this can work, this is a presynaptic terminal where the acetylcholine is released. Well, the toxin get in and block the release of the neurotransmitter. Okay, so you don't get anything going across the neuromuscular junction. There's postsynaptic toxins that'll bind to the other side where the acetylcholine would normally bind to complete neurotransmission, but it's blocked because of the postsynaptic toxin. There's cholinesterase toxins. Cholinesterase is going to chew up the toxin, or the neurotransmitter. In other words, it goes across, but the snake venom has this enzymatic protein in it, and it takes the toxin and chews it up, so it's not the same compound. It can't be pharmacologically active. And then there's cholinesterase inhibitors that are in snake venoms. And if you inhibit the chewing up of acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter, there's got to be a balance there. And all of a sudden you got an excess of acetylcholine. What do you think is going to happen? Get excessive neuromuscular things going on like seizures. So in North America we have the lapid snakes and they're coral snakes. Does anybody know which one's the coral snake in this picture? Anybody want to take a stab? Throw a dart?
Great.
The large one.
Which one?
The large one.
Which is
The bottom.
this one? Yeah, that's the coral snake. This is the Mexican milk snake, and this is the scarlet snake, all found in the United States. But the difference is, if you look at the banding, here the black touches red, and here it's yellow that touches red. So they always say, they teach you this poem, when red touches yellow, it kills a fellow, and red touches black, venom lack. Well, I can tell you from experience, you talk to a patient's been bit, they can't remember anything other than I got bit by a snake that looks like a candy cane. So, but yes, this is the eastern coral snake. There are 3 species of coral snakes in the United States. These are all, again, in the family of Lapidae, and they all have the neurotoxins. So you have the Arizona coral snake, Sonoran coral snake, the eastern coral snake found in Florida, the Texas coral snake, obviously, in West Louisiana and Texas. They all contain neurotoxin called foldotoxin, which kind of can go 2 ways. Can function postsynaptically as an alpha neurotoxin, and presynaptic as a beta neurotoxin. So here you got both effects being blocked by this toxin, presynaptically and both postsynaptically at the neuromuscular junction. Here's another coral snake that's not found in the United States. This is Malaysia. Has similar toxins, but all the way on the other side of the world. It's a rare species. It's a very pretty species, but it's been collected out of the wild quite a bit by amateur herpetologists in zoos, and they've been destroyed because of loss of habitat. And this is kind of happening to some of the venomous snakes around the world. I told the other class I spent time in May and June in Armenia working with mountain vipers, and they're really rare. They're endangered, and if you get into people, amateur herpetologists come in, collect them, and try to sell them, they go several $1,000s per snake, so it becomes an economic-driven thing. About 2 weeks before I was there, 5 Czechoslovakians came in and started taking the snakes, and they got caught by the government. And so I was talking to Aram, the professor I was with, and I said, "What happened?" He goes, "They go to prison." I said, "How long are they going to be in prison?" He goes, "Oh, a couple years." So it's not a good idea to go steal the snakes, but that's happening all over the world. In Sri Lanka, when I was in Sri Lanka, some Germans came in and were stealing a certain species of lizards. They got caught, and they all got put in prison. So my point is, these countries where these snakes are, they're endangered, they're being exploited, and we're losing a lot of the ability to learn from what their venom can do in terms of scaffolds for maybe new medications and things, and also their significance in the ecosystem, maintaining balance of where they live. So the 3-finger toxins, this is an important point. That's one of the key toxins then that elicits neurotoxicity. It's an antagonist to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. In other words, it works against it. It's a competitive inhibitor. And this is this cobra toxin. This is just one of the structures, and this is a cobra. In contrast to the cobra, there's the common krait, bungrus. There's multiple species of this, all in Southeast Asia. Interesting, it has a 3-finger toxin, and it has a phospholipase A2 toxin. This is the other toxin that's really significant for neurotoxicity. Remember those Venn diagrams, those pies charts I showed you? Those are highly represented in elapid species. So one's postsynaptic, this phospholipase is presynaptic. They both irreversibly bind the receptor, block the release by being presynaptic. The net effect of this is you get a descending paralysis. And what you mean by a descending paralysis is it starts in the top of the head. People get where a patient's been bitten, can't crinkle their forehead. Then they can't blink their eyes start to fall shut. Then all of a sudden they start to drool. Then they can't move their shoulders. Then they can't move their arms. Then they can't breathe. Then they die. So these snakes the venoms are highly potent. And it's pretty interesting how these toxins just block out and wreck the neuromuscular junction. There's also innervation to the heart. Seraphotoxins cause cardiotoxic effects by the innervation due to atractaspis. Mole vipers or stiletto vipers. The net effect of that is direct myocardial effects, drop the blood pressure. Also coronary vasoconstriction, dilatation, and you get arrhythmias. I think these should be crossed over, come to think of it. But anyway, these are called mole vipers, basically because they're found in North Africa, and they go through the tunnels where moles live. And they're also called stiletto vipers because the way they bite, most snakes, if they bite and they have fangs, they come straight down, and the fangs go into the lower jaw. These vipers take their fangs and swing them to the side. They're like razors and stab this way. And that's effective for getting their prey. When they're in a tunnel, you can't bite forward, but you can get next to the prey and bite to the side, and that's how they kill their prey. So it's a unique adaptation. You get neuromyotoxic effects. You have things that work on ion channels in the muscles and start to break down the muscles. And you get what's called rhabdomyolysis because of that. And then with that, you get myoglobin from the muscle breakdown into the blood, into the urine, and then that leads to, because those are blood degradation products, and the myoglobin itself cause renal failure. If you look at neuromuscular blockade, and you look at something like sea snakes, the hydrophidae, they have what's called arabutoxins, which is a three-finger toxin. And again, you get neuromuscular blockade at the neuromuscular junction. You look at taipans, which are native to Australia and Papua New Guinea, they have presynaptic toxins, so there's phospholipase A2. These are the Oxyuranus species. So it's kind of interesting that you've got these toxins, and some snakes have more of one than the other, but they elicit the same net pathophysiological effect, be a slightly different mechanism. And you get into the Americas, and you look at some things like the rattlesnakes that are in South America, the cascabel. People don't think about rattlesnakes having neurotoxic effects. For the most part, they think of hematological and tissue damage when they bite. But the Central and South American ones cause a lot of neurotoxicity. And again, just look at things overall. You got presynaptic, postsynaptic blockade, and you got neurotransmitter destruction. The net effect pathophysiologically is respiratory paralysis, flaccid paralysis, fasciculations, which I'll talk about. I talked about the droopy eyelids and the inability to talk. And these are the genera, you know, the cobras, coral snakes, kraits, mambas, taipans, and the Central South American rattlesnakes and sea snakes. Here's one I didn't mention, Acanthophis from Papua New Guinea, Pyrrhus. Very dangerous snake. They lay in the leaf litter and people rarely see them. And because of the warm climates, a lot of the native people are going around barefoot. They end up getting bit. These are very dangerous snakes. And here's a patient that suffered neurotoxicity that had to be put on a respirator. Again, these are lapids, those snakes, the cobras, mambas I was talking about, and the neurological complications. So you get that weakness and faintness feeling initially, nausea and vomiting. You can't talk, the drooling, the eyes drooping. You get paresthesias, in other words, you feel like you got prickly things on your skin, feel kind of weird. Fasciculations, which I'll talk about, respiratory arrest, kills you, and cardiac neurological complications. The other professor, Keyler, in the room here was studying in Australia years back, and they went out at night and they were looking for snakes, and they found this snake, and the professor from St. Olaf said, I think that's a species of water snake. So these guys, they caught it. And here's a picture of Trevor holding the snake with its fangs up, open, and they'd caught it, held it behind the head, and then they're doing scale counts, and they learned out it's a species of Pseudechis, which is a rough-scaled snake, one of the most dangerous snakes in the world. They caught barehanded. It's also responsible for a person being on a respirator the longest any time in the world. The person who was bitten by one was on a respirator for 3 months. So it took that long for that neurotoxin to bind a receptor in the neuromuscular junction to spontaneously come off. There is no specific antivenom for that snake. There is now, but there wasn't at the time. So he was lucky. I think the professor learned he better learn his snakes better. But bottom line is, respiratory paralysis is what will kill a lot of people. These are some cases I consulted on from cobra bites involving Egyptian cobra, Asiatic cobra. It's also called the spectacled cobra. See the spectacles there? Monocled cobra, single monocle. And then black-necked spitting cobra, which is an African spitting cobra. And the bottom line with these, all these patients, about 40% of them went into respiratory arrest. And part of the reason is the average time it took them to get to where they got antivenom treatment was 4 hours. So these venom toxins get on those receptors. They don't come on right away. And the sooner a patient can get treated, obviously, the better. And then they had to be intubated, and the average time they spent on intubated, or mechanical ventilation was a little over 24 hours, but it ranged from 8 to 72 hours. So that time to treatment is critical, and it shows that you can support somebody with respiratory support, but antivenom is still needed. we tried to use a range of different types of antivenoms on these snakes, from Indian Afghan to South African to Australian, so different, I guess, levels of effectiveness depending on how that antivenom is made, and I'll talk about that. Now here's a patient I had that was bitten, and it shows neuromuscular spasm. So this shows the firing change in calcium flux and everything that's going on the imbalance with neurotransmitters at the neuromuscular junction. And this is what it looks like. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. Not a happy camper. And that was a professional herpetologist that accidentally got bitten. Here's a green mamba. Doesn't have a black mouth like the black mamba. But they cause neurotoxic complications and muscle fasciculations. And some of the other species can do this too. What's unique about this, they actually have a venom, a three-finger toxin component called fasciculin. And here's what fasciculations look like. Has anybody ever heard of the term fasciculations? Myokymia? Well, what it looks like translates to clinically is you start looking like you got worms crawling around under your skin. So you could be bitten in the hand and all of a sudden your face can look like there's worms crawling around underneath, or your leg. It's a very weird thing. It's very painful. It's very tough to treat because it doesn't respond real well to the therapies that are available. And here's kind of what it looks like. You can see it's just kind of wiggling around. A lot of the patients, when they see this, they just totally freak out when they see their leg or something doing this. Again, another not happy camper. So how do you treat neurotoxicity from these snakes? Well, you have to develop an antivenom. An antivenom is immunoglobulins that are directed against the venom antigens that cause the toxicity. And once venom is bound to the immunoglobulin, it's pharmacologically inactive. And there's antivenoms made all around the world. United States, we have Crofab, we have Antivip. Here's one from Mexico. There are South American. Brazil has a famous one called Butantan. It's one of the most famous snake research facilities in the world. South Africa, Malaysia, and then Australia has some very advanced facilities as well. So what's changed now with antivenom that they're working on to make them more effective? Remember the graph where I showed you the liquid separation of all those different peaks and all the different things that are in the venom? Well, not all those cause toxic effects to a human being, so why do you want to make antibodies against things that are not hurting anything? So if you've ever heard of the term of proteomics, this is where you can profile something and look at each one of those components and then get antivenomics where you separate out the really toxic components. So these are the major toxin targets. You have snake venom metalloproteinases, you have phospholipase A2s, which I talked about, that's key for neurotoxicity, but you also have serine proteases. You have three-finger toxins and myotoxins, and these are the big players with neurotoxicity. But nonetheless, you get a combination of effects pathophysiologically. But we're concerned about this. So to make an antivenom, you got to hyperimmunize an animal. And like I said, you can take crude venom and do that and get antibodies against everything in that venom profile. But you can also pick the things that are significant for neurotoxicity or hemotoxicity, use those as immunogens by separating them proteomically, hyperimmunize an animal like a horse initially, give it a primary immunization, then you boost it over a period of several months. It takes about 10 months to 1 year, and you generate antibodies against the different toxins. And those antibodies then seek out those specific toxins and neutralize them, and that blocks the pathophysiological effect. So this is typically how an antibody will look. It's like a Y-shaped. This is the FC complement binding component, and here's the toxin binding regions out here. So it's immunoglobulins are proteins. To give the antivenom then, you got to take it, got to purify it, and then you want to make it diluted in an intravenous solution to deliver to a patient intravenously. They do make antivenoms you can put in intramuscularly, but it does a lot of tissue damage more than it does anything else. But in a remote situation where you don't have access to a medical facility, you might be hours or even a day away, it could be effective intramuscularly. Factors that are key to how well a patient tolerates the antivenom or the concentration you make it up. In other words, if you take 2 vials and put it in 20 milliliters, that's not so good. You take 2 vials and put it in 250 milliliters, that's good. You want to dilute it out because you want to you don't only want to block the toxic effect of the snake venom, but you don't want the patient to have an allergic reaction. Again, you're putting foreign proteins in. You know, you can do things with hyperimmunized horses. You can hyperimmunize sheep. But again, those are not human antibodies. The other thing they've done now is they're starting to humanize antibodies, where maybe you can take a monoclonal antibody and take something like you develop in a mouse and take that hybridoma, take the human antibody, start shuffling around the RNA and DNA, and all of a sudden come up with an antibody that's humanized and reduce the significant possibility of an allergic reaction. But one thing you can do when you give an antivenom, you want to give it intravenously. You can run a Y site in your intravenous line, so in other words, you got the main thing with the antivenom, but you can run in peripheral medications if needed, such as epinephrine if somebody starts to have an acute allergic reaction, or an antihistamine like diphenhydramine. They're right there at the ready to titrate those in. So if you see a patient start having sweats and chills, jerks, feeling nauseated, paresthesias, they're having an allergic reaction, stop the antivenom and start running these into your line, and you can gain control of that allergic reaction and stop it from getting worse. Venom itself will continue to do things until it's neutralized, so sometimes you can't always reverse the effects of venom, but your goal is to block the progression of the venom effect. So basically the snake bites, venom gets into your blood eventually, whether it's intravenous, subcutaneous, or intramuscular. Circulates through the body. You give an intravenous line and you're given antibodies. Those get in and start circulating through the body, and your goal is to generate this venom antibody complex, which is neutralize the venom effects. So sometimes you really don't, when a snake bites you don't know how much venom it put in there. And so you can't say, oh, I'm going to give this exact dose of antivenom. So if anything, you're probably overdosing on the antibodies because your goal is to neutralize everything. And if you give high enough doses of antibody, you can also cause redistribution of toxins off receptors and tissues and things due to the antibody gradient. It's kind of a law of mass action. An interesting thing, I got a friend in California who's developed a company called Orphorex. And this is a drug that was developed by Eli Lilly originally for coronary syndrome with inflammation to the heart. And in clinical trials, it just wasn't quite what they wanted for the heart, so they set it aside, but they knew it worked through phospholipase A2, because that's an inflammatory thing as well as a neurotoxic effects. So the snake venoms, the neurotoxic venoms, remember I showed you those things have a fair amount of phospholipase A2. So Matt thought, well, let's see what happens with snake venom. Well, they started using it against snake venom, is neutralizing all the phospholipase A2-induced effects there were. So it's very effective. Actually, this has gone all the way now to clinical trials in humans. And it's varasplativ. It's talk about a tongue twister name. Try to say that. It took me a while to learn to say it. Varasplativ. I thought, well, who thought of that name? But it's a small molecule that works very effectively. And what's interesting, it's a tablet form. So somebody gets bitten by the snake, you don't have to run an IV line. You give them 2 tablets initially, and then you give them 1 tablet every 7 hours for 3 days. Now, what's really interesting about that, if you're in a remote situation in a jungle somewhere or in the military and you can't get to an intravenous line right away, you can give somebody a tablet very easily. So it gives you a head start on things before you could get to a major medical facility. And I think it's a huge advancement. Like I said, it's in phase 2 trials now with humans, so it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. This is the precursor compound, because it becomes demethylated, it becomes this. So now I'm going to show you a couple cases I consulted on that had neurotoxic effects. This first one I'm going to show you, this is for the cascabel, which is Corylus terrificus. This is a Brazilian rattlesnake, very, very dangerous. significant neurotoxicity. This gentleman was a professional zoo person, and they used clear plexiglass tubes to run the snakes in so they can look at the snake. You can't turn and bite them, and they can also examine the snake so that you don't get hurt, the snake doesn't get hurt. The problem was, in this particular case, the snake went into the tube, it flexed really hard, broke the tube, and it turned around and bit him, it really wailed on him, it bit him in the hand. And so one of the initial things you start to see is creatine kinase. This is an enzyme that responds when you have tissue breakdown from trauma. Like if you were in a car accident and got your arm busted, you'd see this creatine kinase value go up. Well, here you got a biochemical induced effect, which is the venom, and that you see the creatine kinase elevate. And I've seen this is 737, but I've seen this go to 100,000. And this is the norm, that's way beyond 300. So it suggests you're going to get significant neuromuscular tissue damage. So we also used a Mexican antivenom in this particular case, which has antibodies against the venom of this species of rattlesnake. And so here's the timeline of what happened with this individual. He was bitten at 0 hours. At 0.2 hours after the bite, his jaw went slack, he slumped, and he couldn't talk. A half hour later, he was in an ambulance and unconscious. He got to the emergency department, and he had to be intubated because he couldn't breathe. He was going into respiratory arrest. So we gave him 7 vials of the antivenom initially. And so he was admitted, he was unresponsive, and he had those fasciculations that I showed you the video of. So he had significant systemic toxicity. So we started another 10 vials over the next 3 hours. He became intubated. We did Doppler on him. In other words, is he perfusing peripherally? So you can measure things via Doppler, the pulsation, and say, okay, he's got peripheral circulation. If you start to lose peripheral circulation, you're going to have other complications. And he then went on to develop an allergic reaction to the antivenom, which complicated things. So fortunately, he didn't have respiratory compromise, but he was intubated if he was. But he did develop flushing, kind of redness and flushing color in the skin. But the antivenom, at the completion of it, was really working well. He was fighting the respirator, so we extubated him, and he could breathe on his own. He was arousable, swelling was decreasing, and the fasciculations had gone away. At 24 hours, he was alert and oriented ×3. In other words, he knew who he was, where he was, and what time it was. And his hand and movement began to improve, and at 48 hours, he was discharged home. This kind of gives you the time course, and if you look at this critical period, how quick that respiratory paralysis set in, if he hadn't gotten to a hospital or gotten antivenom, he'd been dead. This is another case I consulted on, Egyptian cobra case. This individual had this cobra as a pet. He was reported to walk around the neighborhood and show kids this snake, you know. Anyway, on a Saturday morning, he reached into the aquarium one time barehanded and it bit him. So most people would go to the hospital. He went to the bar and sat down and had a drink and started talking to the bartender and said, my pet cobra bit me. And then he began to slur his words some, so the bartender then called the police, and then the police called medical aid. And he was lucky, and this happened in Duluth, Minnesota. Cobras are not native to Duluth, Minnesota. So I contacted the Milwaukee Zoo. I consulted different zoos about the medical treatment for snakebite and antivenoms to keep stocked. They had the South African antivenom, which is effective against Egyptian cobras. So we had it flown to Duluth. We administered it to the patient. Even though it was several hours later, it worked. And again, we spared this guy his life. And the final case here is really kind of an interesting one and really, truly tragic, involving Joe Slowinski, good scientist who was born in New York City. And this has all happened. We'll look at this timeline. So Joe got his bachelor's in biology at Kansas, got his PhD at the University of Miami, did a postdoc at the National Museum of Natural History in Louisiana State University. He became the associate curator of herpetology at California Academy of Sciences, which is a pretty high-powered academy globally. He discovered 18 new species of amphibians and reptiles. He's co-founder of the first online herpetological journal, Contemporary Herpetology, also Introduction to Genetics, 1998, and was on the editorial board of Systematic Biology. So he studied snakes around the world, and one of his favorite places was Southeast Asia. So he goes from California with some of his graduate students to Myanmar, which is Burma. And here they are on the elephants. They rode the elephants all the way back into the jungle, and here's a lot of the Burmese people and some of the graduate students that went along on the trip, a handful of them. While he was there, he discovered another new species, the Burmese spitting cobra, Naja mandalaensis. So here they are in northern Burma, or Myanmar, China to the east, Cambodia to the north, India to the west. And here's Joe in the field. They had caught this snake the day before, and Hu Tun Win holds out a snake bag, and he goes, I think it's a dynodon. And a dynodon's like a dog tooth or a big tooth snake. And Joe pulled out a small banded snake dangling from his right middle finger. And he goes, that's an effing crate. It's not a dynodon. It's Bungarus. So here's the snake that actually bit him. It was a little over 15 inches long, a multi-banded crate, Bungarus multicinctus. And here's what they thought it was. And you can see how you might get confused right away. This is the big tooth or dog tooth snake, dynodon. This is a colubrid species, which is maybe mildly venomous. In other words, you might have a swollen hand at worst, but nothing's going to mess you up neurologically or kill you. So here's what happened. This is the same time the World Trade Center is getting hit on 9/11, just coincidentally. 7:30 a.m., there's 13-hour time difference. He was over in Asia. He laid down, he says, I'll call you over if I start to feel symptoms. And he'd eaten some cereal before this. At 8:15, his hand was tingling. At 11 a.m., they realized things were kind of going downhill, and they sent 2 Burmese on an 8-mile run to town with a radio to try to get respiratory support, a mechanical ventilator. However, by 12 noon, things were sliding, and he started to have requiring mouth-to-mouth respiration, and he said, let me die. By 3 p.m., the air rescue was delayed due to a military hold and then bad weather. And by nightfall, finally the Burmese doctor and 2 nurses arrive on foot with a respirator, only to find out the respirator's broken. This whole time, he is on mouth-to-mouth respiration from his graduate students. By midnight, 17 hours post, still mouth-to-mouth, and the storms delay further rescue. It was really bad storms and monsoons. Helicopter could not get to them. By 3 a.m., he could only signal with his big toe. It was his only communication. By 9:30, the respiration still continued artificially and continued for another 3 hours, and as well as the heart massage. And then at 12:35, 29 hours after the bite, he was pronounced dead after 24 hours of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. What this shows you is that neurotoxin, the Bungarus toxins that are in the crate, had both the phospholipase A2 and the 3-finger toxin bound to the receptors. It's irreversible. It didn't come off. It takes a long time to get off that receptor. So he had no control of his diaphragm or any part of his body. And this was a quote that he actually heard from one of his graduate students. He seemed to embody the understanding that a fully natural world includes the possibility that nature can kill us. And it's kind of ironic that that's what happened and cost him his life at 38 years old. So it shows that there's a lot in these neurotoxic venoms that are very interesting to work as research scaffolds for developing medications. It also shows that these animals in nature have these venoms designed for certain reasons, and that's to acquire their prey, not to kill humans. And what happens in their prey may not be the same thing that happens in a human being. But they're quite unique, but potentially quite dangerous, obviously. So I kind of leave it there and welcome any questions you have. Anybody? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I was supposed to bring, here's a king cobra skin, and a patient I had was bitten by a cobra, and I got this as a gift. A This species of snake can get up to 18 feet long. That's a big venomous snake. This one's only about 12.
Yeah. I told the other classes they get about, a third of their body off of the ground. So it'd be pretty terrifying running that.
If you look at it, this is banded. Hold on, Trevor.
Yep.
Hold tight it. See the banding pattern? So this is a Thai species from Thailand. The Indian species are pretty much solid gray. There's 3 species of king cobra. And king cobras, by the way, aren't even true cobras. Even though they've fed their hood, they're a different genus. They're Ophioophagus. They're monotypic. And the rest of the cobras are the genus Naja. But still cause similar neurologic effects. So it's quite dangerous. I had a friend that studied these, and the first time he was over in India, and he ran into a king cobra on the trail. I guess it was about a 12 to 13, maybe 14-foot snake. And he said he's looking down the path in front of me. He said he looked ahead, and the snake's staring him in the eye. And he said, "Man," he said, "I don't know if I want to study these things or just run for my life." He said it really made you think. He said the snake would keep moving, the snake's head would just following. So it's tracking, and people don't understand they're processing information. They're wild animals, but they're not stupid. They have to survive, and they don't survive just by being stupid. Anyway, he didn't run, but he didn't catch the snake either. He thought he'd learn a little more before he tried to catch his first king cobra. Thought he'd maybe rather start with a smaller one. But anyway, he did his PhD work and everything on king cobras. Still over there studying it now in his career. Any questions at all? Yeah.
Well, I guess obviously if you're trying to catch like an anaconda or something, you can just kind of wrestle it, but how do you catch something that big that's poisonous?
Very carefully. She goes, no.
Venomous.
She goes, how do you catch a big snake that's venomous? It takes experience. I worked with smaller cobras in Sri Lanka that may be 7 feet long, 6, 7 feet. And everybody thinks cobras can only strike going forward. You hear that all the time. I'm telling you, they can turn around so fast, it's unbelievable and be staring you in the face. So typically I should have brought, I never thought about that, but use a snake hook that's maybe 4 to 5 feet long to work with the snake. But you have to learn to distract them by doing that, and then you can work with their tail and you can maneuver them, but you have to be patient. It takes a lot of time to learn their behavior, just like anything. And you gotta learn really that snakes sometimes have a bad day, just like people do. When that happens, you just leave the snake alone. There's other times they're just big babies, they don't do much of anything. But it takes experience, but you use those hooks so you don't have your hands on them directly when you're learning. And there's also tongs that work that grab very lightly, but don't hurt the snake. When you grab with tongs, you gotta think those snakes start to panic. They think a raptor or something's coming down on them. And their first response is, if you're not careful, is turn around and bite it. And so that's with cobras. Rattlesnakes are, for the most part, a lot easier to manipulate. Copperheads, they will tend to hook more easily, and you can just lift them around. But again, it takes time and experience. You just don't want to go out and grab one. There's people who do that. I mean, I've had patients bitten by 2 patients bitten by rattlesnakes in Arizona that caught the snake, and they're holding it up, sticking out their tongue, and taking the snake, and the snake bit them right on the tongue. Stupid. That's when you say the snakes are smarter than people. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there like just a quick way to tell what ones are venomous just by looking at them? Or are they all different?
Well, in the United States, rattlesnakes have rattles. That's one thing there. But copperheads and water moccasins have vertically elliptical pupils. In other words, they look like a football when they're in light. And so non-venomous snakes don't, they have round pupils. But where that crosses over, coral snakes don't have elliptical pupils, they're round, so you gotta remember the color pattern. You get to other countries and it's really, most of your vipers and fit vipers will have vertically elliptical pupils. But that's when they're in bright light. You get them in the dark, what do your pupils do? They dilate. But one of the things you shine light, if it goes to the vertical, then it is a venomous species. But cobras, their eyes don't, they're round. So it comes down to really learning the snakes. People say about triangular heads and all this, well, In the United States, a big water snake will flatten its head out and look real triangular. And they have a nasty attitude, so most people, you know, they're not gonna wanna find out if it's non-venomous or if it is venomous. So it comes down to really kind of studying and learning their basically their markings and patterns. And then also like when I'm in different parts of the world, what are the snakes native to that area? Kind of learning ahead of time, you know, what's indigenous versus not there. Narrows it down some, but even then you gotta be careful.
Anyone know what our venomous species is in Minnesota?
Yeah, we have a venomous snake in species in Minnesota. It's very rare, but we do. Anybody?
Timber rattlesnake?
Yeah, timber rattlesnakes, yeah. Crowlus horridus. They're only found in a very southeastern portion of the state along the Mississippi River corridor. And we get a bite, natural occurring bite about once every 5 years. Otherwise, we get a bite once a year because somebody's messing around with the snakes. Doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. I've had people drive over them to kill them and then they get out to cut their head off. And the snake's still got gangliotic reflexes and it bites the patient. And they up in the hospital. Had one patient in a campground down in Money Creek. Driving out of the campground, saw the snake, jumped out, was gonna take his knife and kill it. So he got knelt down and the snake literally bit him in the eye, he lost his eye. But he went ahead and killed the snake. He was getting even with it. I said, well, probably wouldn't have happened if you just left it alone to start with. They're protected species. But I wanted its skin. Well, you know, you both lost on the deal, unfortunately. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there any like cool snakes in particular you've worked with that you thought were just really unique?
Well, I like timber rattlesnakes just because they're native and it's one of the first species I ever saw, but I think probably I like things that are green, lemon lime green, so green mambas are one of my favorites. There's also Oxybillus, which is a green vine snake in Central America. There's also Ayatollah, which is a green vine snake in Asia. So I tend to like there's something about the lime green color I like. It's kind of fascinating. And they also tend to be tree dwelling. So like in Sri Lanka, to find a vine snake climbing the tree and getting up there, you know, it's interesting being in the tree, kind of like, what am I going to do, you know, if something goes wrong. I had a friend in Africa, a fifth Seminole student, Mozambique, and somebody called, there was a green mamba up in the tree in their yard, and it was way up there, so the fire department came because he couldn't climb the tree, ran the ladder up, and he got up there, and it was about a 6-foot green mamba, and he's looking at the snake trying to get this, and he gets a hold of this, he turns around, there's another one staring right in his face. And he didn't know what to do because he thought, you know, it could have bit him, but it didn't. He got down the ladder and went back up and got the other snake. So he was lucky, because you don't know, they're scared. They bite out of fear. People say they attack, you know, and they're aggressive, but snake bites because they're scared. We look like a big monster to them, you know, and so they're just fighting for their life. So yeah, they'll get upset and try to defend themselves. But yeah, green snakes. Anything else? All right. Oh yeah.
Do you just like wear anything so you like to prevent getting bit, like gloves or anything?
No,
Or just
I mean,
kind of
you can, I don't, because you don't have the dexterity, and that's where you use the hooks and things. You can wear gaiters, you know, that protect your feet and calf, because if you're in the field and you're wading through like rice paddies and things, it's a good thing. Although, the problem with this, if you're out in the field and you're wearing boots that are knee high or something, like in Sri Lanka, if you do that, it is so blasted hot and humid, you're just burning up. So I wear ankle high boots, and you just try to be really careful. When I was in Sri Lanka, we had one of the villages of the snake people in Tagudababa. These are people that made their living going to different villages showing their snakes, and they teach the father teaches the sons how to catch the venomous snakes and work with them. So we're in the village, and the guy says, Raja goes, do you want to go look for some snakes? I go, well, let's let's go. So it's 10 at night, and it's kind of a half moon. And here we are walking through this rice paddy on these little paths like this. And I got short pants on and boots, and there's a moon, and I go, and we're looking for cobras and Russell's vipers. And Russell's viper is one of the most dangerous snakes in the world. And I kind of thought to myself, am I nuts? And Raj is up there in the front, and he's got nothing but a sarong on and barefoot walking along. Oh, there's one, he barehanded caught a 5-foot long Russell's viper. That's extremely huge. I'd never seen anything like it. He just took his hand, he moved like this, and the next thing you know, he's got the snake. I mean, I wouldn't believe it if I got the photos to prove it, but I mean, again, it shows if you learn the behavior of animals and are patient, learn the skill, you know, you can work with them, but it's hard. The people that work in the rice paddies and the tea plantations, people say, well, why don't you wear boots all the time? Rubber boots. So you can do that to protect yourself, but then you end up with fungal problems. Or the next thing you do, you got leeches all down in your boot, and you got 20 leeches you got to pull off the end every day on top of everything. So bites occur in these third world countries, given the type of jobs they have to do, and you try to, they try to watch. I mean, it's amazing there aren't more bites than there are. But like in Sri Lanka, there's 40,000 venomous bites a year. And that's a country, smaller than Rhode Island. So, it's out there. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Remember last Wednesday's material was the last bit that will be on your exam. It's Thursday, Friday. Like usual, when I get it finished, I'll send you a little bit about it. We'll see you on Wednesday.
So
All right.
the lectures are Friday.
For stuff, yep.